Hey guys, a couple of weeks ago I was in Portland, Oregon visiting some friends, and during my trip I got the opportunity to play a bunch of Scrabble games against Carl Johnson, another top expert. One particularly interesting game came down to the following pre-endgame position that I'm going to show you in today's video. It was Carl's turn, he's down 27 points, I'm up 360 to 333, and Carl holds AILRTTZ. There are 9 tiles unseen to Carl at this point. As you guys can see on the right, EEHILMSTU. Now, with 9 tiles unseen, that means there are 2 in the bag and 7 on my rack. Of course, where this becomes complicated is Carl has no way of knowing which are the 2 tiles in the bag. So Carl's goal in this position is to make the play that wins with the largest possible number of different tile draws he could conceivably get from the bag. Now, 27 points might not seem like a very large deficit, but Carl's actually in a deceptively bad position here. And the reason for that is there's really nowhere particularly good for him to play his Z. And if Carl can't figure out a good plan for his Z, he's going to have a very hard time winning this game. Like I said before, Carl can't really score a lot of points with his Z on this turn. So he's got 2 distinct, seemingly viable paths to victory. One of them is to get rid of his Z immediately for a small score with a play like Za and Anna, which would score 16 points. The idea here would be to hope to draw into a bingo on his next turn, which would be enough to win the game. The other potential path to victory is not scoring a lot on this turn, but hoping to set himself up for a big Z play on his next turn, which might be enough to overtake me. Carl here decided to go for the latter of these 2 plans, playing Stilt from the S Infusanes for 8 points. Now, 8 is of course not a lot of points, but Carl has a very clever idea here. He's hoping to draw the S out of the bag, after which he'll be threatening SARS from the T in Stilt he just opened, which would score a whopping 72 points, by virtue of putting the Z on the double letter score and the S on the triple word score. And if I don't block that, then Carl almost certainly will be able to win. The problem with this idea is it's not that hard for me to block that once I realize that's a threat. So Carl here figured he needed to draw a backup plan for his Z if I were to block SARS. As such, he looked at the potential of drawing IS out of the bag, because if Carl pulls IS, he's threatening not only SARS from the T in Stilt, but he's also threatening Isar in the top left corner of the board, overlapping with Anna and Ram, which would score 51 points and also be an outplay, ending the game immediately. And with these 2 plays on completely opposite corners of the board, I would be powerless to stop both of them, guaranteeing Carl a big play whatever I do. Now, as it turns out, Carl was close to hitting the IS draw. He actually drew ES out of the bag, which means I had EHILMTU on my rack. So I, of course, realized that Carl had AERSZ as his remaining 5 tiles. I quickly realized that Carl was threatening SARS for 72 points, and that I was absolutely going to have to do something about it if I wanted to hold on and win. As such, I played Tithe for 27 points, which does appear to be my best endgame play. Carl went out with Crazes, but this only scores 19 points, a far cry from 72, and after Carl got 10 bonus points for my unplayed LMU, I ended up holding on to win the game by 17 by a final score of 387 to 370. Now, as I mentioned in the actual game, Carl didn't quite hit his fish. Once again, he was going for an IS draw and he got an ES draw. So what would have happened if he got the IS draw he was hoping for? Well, then I would have had EEHLMTU. And I would have been in a bit of a pickle because I can't block both SARS and Isar in the top left, as I was saying before. However, I now have a much higher scoring play since I have 2 Es. I can play Theme for 42 points. And this is actually just barely enough to still beat Carl's outplay of Isar, because Isar scores 51, bringing him to within 10, but he only gets 6 bonus points for my unplayed LTU, and I would end up holding on to win by 402 to 398. So Carl's play of Stilt is a really clever idea, however, it unfortunately never wins the game for him. Because even if he gets his ideal draw of IS, as we just saw, I'm going to be able to barely hold on by playing Theme and outrunning his outplay. So Stilt never wins for Carl. The question now becomes, is there another play that might win for Carl sometimes? And the answer is yes. We just looked at a play for Carl that doesn't play off his Z, instead of holding it, trying to score big with it on his next turn. We saw that wasn't going to work, so let's think about Carl's other potential plan of attack here, namely playing his z immediately. One play that stands out as an option immediately might be Tsar for 20 points in the top left corner. This brings Karl to within 7 points. However, the problem is, keeping 3 tiles on his rack and drawing into a bag with just 2 tiles, Karl is going to end up with less than a full rack of 7 tiles in the endgame. And the problem is, with only 5 tiles, Karl is of course not going to be able to bingo, and I won't go through all the possibilities, but it's not too hard to see that Karl is never going to be able to outscore me in the endgame. The problem is, while Karl's only down 7, it is going to be my turn, and I'll be able to use that turn to both score well and unload a lot of the tiles on my rack. If Karl can even go out on his next turn, which is far from a guarantee with 5 tiles on this tight a board, it's not going to be enough to catch me. Again, I'm not going to go through all the possibilities, but the computer engine Macondo does indeed confirm that regardless of what 2 tiles Karl draws out of the bag after Tsar, I am going to be able to hold on in the endgame if I play properly. So Tsar, like Stilt, is a no-go for Karl. So now you're probably thinking, what if Karl then gets rid of his Z in a way that would keep the full 7 tiles on his rack after his play? So what he needs to do is play off either just his Z or his Z and at most one other tile. It turns out there's actually only one way to do that. He can't play off just his Z on this board, and his only spot to play off the Z and one other tile is Za and Anna for 16 points. Now, while this play does keep a fairly clunky looking leave with ILR along with duplicated T's, the key difference between this and Tsar is that Karl is now going to have a full set of 7 tiles on his rack after he draws the 2 remaining tiles from the bag. And if he can threaten a bingo in multiple spots of the board, such that I can't stop him from bingoing out, he is going to win the game. And it turns out that he can do that if he draws one of the 2 E's and the S out of the bag. Because if he can do that, then he'll be threatening Slitter and Durls down the N column, as well as Clitters on the 14 row from the C in Bardic. And it's not too hard to see that these 2 plays are far enough apart on the board that I'm going to be powerless to block both, and as such, I'll be powerless to stop Karl from bingoing out and ending the game. If Karl hits his ES draw, I'm going to have this rack, and like I said, there's nothing I can do to stop Karl from bingoing. The most I can score would be with Rehem for 25, but it's very easy to see that Karl can bingo out and win this game quite handily. Now, you might recall that ES is actually what Karl drew in the real game after he played Stilt. So as it turns out, if Karl had played Za during the game, given what was in the bag, he would have actually won. So not playing Za in this position turned out to be a game-losing mistake for Karl. That being said, Za still certainly doesn't give him good odds to win the game. The only way he wins after Za is if he specifically draws ES out of the bag. No other draws will give him a win. And the odds of that are 2 in 36 or 1 in 18. Because with 9 tiles Karl could draw, and him drawing 2 of them, there are 9 choose 2 or 36 different 2-tile combinations Karl could draw. And there are 2 ways to draw an E and an S, because there's just one S, but there are 2 E's. So Karl could draw the first E and the S, or the second E and the S. It doesn't matter which of the 2 E's he gets along with the S, of course, either way he's going to be threatening his bingos and win the game. So that's why the odds of Karl winning after Za are 2 in 36 or 1 in 18. So certainly not a very high chance, but definitely a non-zero chance, and indeed, as we saw, it turns out that in this particular game, Karl's 1 in 18 after Za would have hit, and he would have actually won. Now, the question does still remain, though. 1 in 18 is definitely better than 0, but can Karl do even better than 1 in 18? Is there a better play than Za? And the answer, again, turns out to be yes. There are 2 plays in this position, according to the Macondo engine, that win anything other than 0. Za is one of them, winning 1 out of 18. There is another play that wins more than 1 out of 18, and it's absolutely mind-boggling. The play I'm talking about is not Tsar in this spot, but Isar. And at first you're probably thinking, wait a minute, this seems so wrong for multiple reasons. Number 1, Karl is getting rid of both of his vowels and keeping the very clunky LTT. And number 2, if I have the S for Sizar, I'm going to absolutely pummel him for possibly over 60 points on my next turn. So what is he thinking? Well, what we need to do here, guys, is reframe the second thing I just said. Yes, if I have the S, the game is over and I'm going to score a ton of points. But, remember, there's no guarantee I have the S. Karl knows I have 7 of these 9 unseen tiles, which include an S. But the S could very well be one of the two tiles in the bag. And what if it is? Well, if I don't have the S and the S is in the bag, then guess who ends up having the S after this play? Carl. And now I'm the one who has to think, uh-oh, Carl has the S. He's threatening big plays with Caesar, and how do I block? It's not the easiest thing to block, as we're going to see right now. Let's say first that Carl draws ES as he did during the game, and I have my actual rack of EHILMTU. Well, the problem is now Carl is threatening to play Caesar and Sett, SETT, for 57 points, and there's really nothing I can do about it. The problem is the only tile I have that goes next to the I in isar is the T for it, and if I just play the T there for 4 points, this doesn't help at all, because with ET being a word, Carl just plays Sett now for 59 points instead of 57. And if I try to play a two-letter word there, it doesn't really help me either. ET just allows Sett, in fact even settle as an outplay through the E I've provided. It stops Sett, but Carl can still play Silt for the same score, and Ut doesn't really help me either because it still allows Suit. So there's literally nothing I can do about Carl scoring over 50 points in that spot. As such, my best endgame turns out to be completely ignoring Carl's setup, playing Rehem for 25. Carl, of course, goes with Sett for 57 as planned. Stet in the same spot would work similarly. And I will be able to go out with Litu for 18, which gets me close, but not quite close enough, as when all is said and done, Carl will still win by 5, 410 to 405. So we now know that this play of isar for Carl in the original position wins with an ES draw, just like Za. Now, Za, if you recall, won only with an ES draw, so we already know that isar is at least as good as Za. But the question remains, are there any other draws Carl might win with? In particular, he probably wants to draw the S and another vowel, because if he draws the S and a consonant, he's not going to really have any plays there he's threatening. Just Caesar for 42 probably isn't going to be enough. So let's next look at SI as a possible draw for Carl. If Carl draws IS, then I'm sitting on EEHLMTU, and my situation is actually even worse than before, because now Carl is not only threatening a play with Caesar, he's threatening an outplay, Stilt for 60, and it's very annoying for me to block. I could play my T here as before for 4 points, but that still allows Silt, which will score 59. Playing something like Et doesn't help because he still gets Sett, S-E-T-T, and playing Ut doesn't help because he still gets Suit. So there's no way I can stop Carl from getting a massive play on the top row. If I ignore the setup as before with Rehem, Carl of course goes out with Stilt for 60 and wins on the spot. And if I play something like Ut, then Carl's most straightforward win is actually not to even play Suit, but to just go out immediately with Durls and Stilt for 13. Which brings him to within 2, and he gets 20 more points from my unplayed tiles, and he wins comfortably by 18, 386 to 368. So we now know that Isar in the original position wins for Carl not only with an ES draw, but also with an IS draw. So now there's one more vowel for us to consider. What if Carl draws US out of the bag? If Carl draws SU out of the bag, then I'm going to be looking at a rack of EEHILMT, with Carl threatening to play Caesar and Slut for 57 points. Now, I actually can sort of stop him in this case by dropping my T for 4 points, since there are actually no words Carl can make that start with SU that would allow him to overlap Ut. It's worth mentioning that it wouldn't work because that allows Silt, and Et wouldn't work because that allows Sett, S-E-T-T. But if I play it, then Carl cannot play any words on top. However, he could still drop his S for Caesar, and it turns out that I would be able to win here, however, it requires a very complicated sequence. After it, Carl is of course going to drop his S for 42, and he takes a 31-point lead. And now Rehem doesn't work, because that would give Carl plays like Tut on the right-hand side of the E and the M for a lot of points. However, Re-Heal in the same spot does work, and the idea here is that I'm going to be threatening MI next to the E and the L, which will score 18 points, and if that gets blocked, I have MI to the left of the I, N, and Doing, which scores 16. After this play, Carl's best move is to play Until for 10 points, but this is going to fall just a little bit short, since I go out for 18 as planned, and the game is tied, but I get 2 extra points from Carl's unplayed T, which is decisive, and I win by 2, 407, 405. However, instead of playing it for 4, I have a second winning play after Carl's play of Isar, assuming he draws US, that's even harder to see but wins even more convincingly. It is item for 9 from the Ayin Dayin. The idea here is I'm setting up a play here for over 40 points on my next turn. And what happens is, if Carl ignores this and sticks to his plan of playing slut for 57, he does go up by 41, but I now go out for 46 points and win by 7 when all is said and done. So Carl would be forced to block my high-scoring outplay with something like Tuts for 22. But that doesn't work either, as I can still go out with Chili, and while this only scores 11, Carl had to score 22 instead of 57, and it turns out I once again win by 7 here, this time 382 to 375. So after item, Carl is sunk whatever he responds with. And that means if Carl plays Isar and draws SU, he is lost. I need to either find it or item, which, if you ask me, are pretty tough to find, but as long as I can find and make one of those two plays, I will hold on and win. So now going back to the original position, we know that Isar wins for Carl with a draw of ES or IS, but loses with US. Now, if Carl draws the S and a consonant, then his task is going to be a lot more bleak. In particular, if the other consonant he draws is not the H. Because then, if he draws either SL, SM, or ST, he's not going to be threatening any horizontal plays hooking Sizar. He's only going to be threatening Sizar with just the S for 42. And if I have the H, it's not hard to see I'm going to have a play like Rehem or Reheal from the RE and the L column, and that's going to easily score enough with my existing lead to outrun Carl's S drop of Sizar. I won't go through all of those situations in detail. However, the situation where Carl draws SH is a little bit more interesting for two reasons. Number one, I now don't have Rehem type plays because I don't have the H. And number two, SH is a word, so Carl would now be threatening to play SH in Sizar, not just Sizar, and that would score 57. So I need to either figure out a way to outrun that somehow without the H, or figure out an effective block. Let's see how that would work. If Carl draws SH, I'm going to have EEILMTU. And the key play I need to make here is UT for 8. And this completely stops Carl from using the top left triple. Because he can't just drop the S now, of course SU is not a word, and he has no valid words starting with SU using the rest of the tiles on his rack. So he is now completely stopped from using that spot. Now, on the other hand, this only scores 8 points. I'm taking a 15-point lead, and he's got an S and an H. Can he maybe still outscore me in this endgame without using that spot? And the answer is no, because the problem is, with no vowels, Carl is going to have very limited options. His highest scoring play here is SH and Durls for 19, but that's a no-go because I then just go out with LMI for 13, and there's really very little else for Carl to do here. His next highest scoring play is the same word SH with doings for just 13 points. But it's very easy for me to win the game after this play because Carl has LTT, he's not going out anytime soon, and I have a very flexible rack with 3 vowels, so as long as I don't do anything crazy, I should win this game without issue. One way to do this is me for 16 points next to the IN in doings. After that, Carl can't score more than 8 points for anal, and then I would just go out with seal for 8 points on the bottom, of course winning the game very comfortably. So once again, if Carl draws SH after Isar, despite threatening SH and Sizar, I'm going to win the game very easily by just playing UT for 8, blocking everything he has in the top left part of the board. So, going back to the original position, we now know his play of Isar wins with ES, wins with IS, loses with everything else whether or not he draws the S. So this is better than the other alternative we looked at before of Za, which wins only with ES. How much better to be exact? Well, as we discussed before, Za wins 1 out of 18 or 2 out of 36. Isar would win 3 out of 36. The same 2 out of 36 for ES as a possible draw, and an additional 1 out of 36 for IS as a possible draw. Note that IS only contributes 1 out of 36, not 2 out of 36, because there's only one I. With 2 E's, along with the 1 S, Carl is twice as likely to draw ES as IS. So IS only occurs 1 in 36, summing that with the 2 in 36 that ES still wins, yields 3 in 36 for Isar, or if you reduce that, 1 in 12. So once again, Isar winning 1 in 12, Za winning 1 in 18, nothing else in this original position for Carl winning ever. Really, really interesting stuff here, guys, and this is just such a hard play, I think, Isar to make over the board, because you have to concede that if your opponent has the S, you're going to get absolutely smashed on the top row for over 60 points in most cases. That being said, it's still the best play in this position, and just a good reminder that whenever you're in a seemingly challenging spot like Carl is here, being at a deficit and struggling to find a good place to get rid of his Z, sometimes you just need to give yourself a chance to get lucky. Because remember, if you're in a bad position and you assume the worst, you're never going to win. You need to try to get lucky when you're in a bad position, and in this case, what Carl needs to try to do is get lucky in the form of me not having the S and him drawing it along with one of the two vowels he needs out of the bag. So this would have been a really, really cool play for Carl to make in this position. As it turns out, it would have won the game since ES was in the bag. But like I said, super tough play to come up with and find over the board. But I think it's a really educational position. Like I said, just to make sure you're always thinking about out-of-the-box ideas when you're down. Even if a play looks completely ludicrous at first, like you're just giving away points to your opponent, think about it a little more. Maybe depending on what you draw, the play could actually benefit you instead. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks again to Carl for this awesome game. Really appreciate him taking the time to play some games when I was in Portland a few weeks ago. Thanks as always to you guys for watching the videos and supporting my channel. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks again for watching. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.